All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a deep dive into the work of Bob Camblin, and wow, you've given us quite a bit to work with here.
Quite a bit.
We've got a bunch of his quotes, a pretty detailed biography. There's even this YouTube video that breaks down one of his paintings
Oh, cool.
called Eternal Dance, and even an excerpt from an art book.
Wow.
So it's a lot, and I think it's going to help us to put together not just, the pieces of what Camblin painted, but also like how he actually saw the world. Like his philosophies on art and life and the creative process, all that.
Absolutely. And Camblin really wasn't afraid to challenge conventions, was he?
No, he wasn't.
Just take a look at some of these quotes, like this one. Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both. He's almost like he saw no separation between science and mysticism, finding truth and inspiration in both.
Yeah. Yeah, he really makes you think, doesn't he? And then he's also got this quote, "I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe." What do you think he means by that, like striving for the perfectly average?
Well, that's one of the things that makes Camblin so fascinating.
Yeah.
He embraces paradox. Like he sees the world in shades of gray, not just black and white. And the perfectly average, it could be his way of saying that, truth lies somewhere in the middle, in the balance of those opposing forces.
When you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense, especially considering some of his other quotes too. Like,
Right.
art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
Wow.
So he definitely saw art as like deeply connected to life.
Yeah.
As like a means of survival, even.
Absolutely. It wasn't just aesthetics to him.
Right.
It was about something deeper, something much more essential.
Yeah.
And you see that, reflected in this other statement. The artist today is the only free agent. What do you make of that one?
Oh, that's a bold statement, isn't it?
It is.
Maybe he's suggesting that artists have this unique ability to see beyond, like societal constraints, to like break free from the expectations and limitations that,
Yeah.
bind most people.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there.
Okay.
And then there's this gem: when you think, don't act. When you act, don't think.
What?
It's almost like he's encouraging us to step outside the realm of logic,
Yeah.
to tap into like a more intuitive way of being, which I think is where his concept of the mystic switch comes into play.
Yes. Let's talk about that, the mystic switch. He mentions it quite a few times.
So he does.
But never really defines it. So what do you think he means?
Well, based on the context of his quotes and the visual language of his work, I think the mystic switch refers to that moment of pure inspiration, like a flash of insight where the artist just transcends conscious thought and taps into, this deeper well of creativity. It's that aha moment where everything just clicks.
It sounds a lot like a Zen concept, this idea of letting go and letting that creative energy flow through you.
Right.
Speaking of Zen, we've also got this book here, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 2, and it has illustrations by Camblin.
Oh, wow.
So clearly Zen philosophy was a significant part of his life and his work.
It seems so. And we see that connection echoed in another quote. Your ego hidden and following you as gracefully as a goldfish as well. Folded under the waving tail, how neat that thought is.
Yeah.
A little bit humorous, but it speaks to a core principle of Zen.
Uh-huh.
Detaching from the ego, letting go of that self-importance.
So we're starting to get a sense of, his philosophical leanings, this blend of scientific curiosity, mystical wonder, Zen detachment, but how does all of that translate into his visual art?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Right.
Let's take a look at Eternal Dance.
Yeah.
This painting you included in the research materials. Have you had a chance to watch that YouTube video?
I have, yeah.
That breaks down the symbolism and the imagery.
It's a visually striking piece.
Yeah.
You've got this radiant pathway, and it's leading towards this void, and there's a skeletal figure, like dancing or floating above it.
Yeah.
And then these three, vibrant orbs that just kind of like pulsate with energy. It's a little whimsical and a bit eerie, don't you think?
I think that duality is key to understanding his work.
Yeah.
That YouTube video and that art book excerpt, they both point out that, the skeleton isn't portrayed in this macabre or frightening way. It's almost playful,
Yeah.
which suggests that Camblin saw death not as an end, but as a natural part of that cycle of life.
Which, goes back to his idea of the perfectly average perspective,
Exactly.
embracing the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow.
Precisely. And those orbs, they add another layer of complexity.
Yes.
The video suggests that they might represent life, death, and spiritual energy.
Hmm.
But what's really fascinating is how they're positioned in relation to the skeleton in that pathway.
I noticed that too. They're not randomly scattered.
Right.
It's a deliberate placement that suggests a connection between them, but it's not clear what that connection is.
And that's what makes the Eternal Dance so compelling.
Yeah.
It invites you to look closer to contemplate those relationships between the elements and try to decipher, that deeper meaning that Camblin might embedded in the composition.
So it's not about passively observing the painting.
Yeah.
It's about actively engaging with it.
Yes.
Using our own magic seeing to unlock those secrets hidden in the imagery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where, Camblin's brilliance shines through. He's not just creating art, he's creating an experience,
Right.
an invitation to explore the mysteries of existence through, his unique lens.
That's a good point. It's really interesting how much Camblin emphasizes perception, like seeing the world in a new way. He even says we can train ourselves to open instead of close the circuits of perception. It's like he thinks that we can choose how we experience reality.
That's a great observation, and it connects back to his idea of magic seeing.
Yeah.
Remember that quote you mentioned where he talks about looking into the atom and into magic to find what we need? It's not about, science or mysticism on their own.
Right.
It's about blending those perspectives, like expanding our awareness to see more possibilities.
So how does that magic seeing show up in his work, specifically in Eternal Dance? Are there visual clues or techniques that he uses to kind of guide our perception?
Absolutely. If you look closely at that YouTube video analysis, you'll notice how Camblin uses color and light and composition to create this sense of depth and movement.
Okay.
Like the radiant pathway. It's not just a flat line. It kind of vibrates with energy. It draws your eye towards the void. And the way he uses contrasting colors, especially in the orbs,
Yeah.
creates this sense of pulsating energy. It's almost like you can feel the painting breathe.
That's so cool. It's like he's using these visual cues to activate our own mystic switch.
Yes.
To make us feel the energy and the symbolism, not just understand it intellectually.
Exactly. And that art book excerpt, it mentions how Camblin draws inspiration from all these different art movements, like Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Symbolism, Expressionism, even Fauvism.
Wow.
He takes elements from all of them and weaves them together to create his own unique style that's both familiar and completely new.
So he's taking the best of what came before him and creating something fresh and exciting, kind of like a chef,
Yeah.
blending these unexpected flavors to make a masterpiece.
Yeah, I like that.
But speaking of pushing boundaries, let's talk about Camblin's career. The biography you've got is packed with exhibitions and awards and all sorts of milestones.
It really is.
Where do we even begin?
Well, I think it's important to remember that Camblin's career wasn't like an overnight success story.
Okay.
He worked really hard honing his craft, experimenting with different styles and mediums, and gradually building his reputation in the art world.
His journey started in the mid-1950s, right?
Yeah, it did.
The bio mentions his participation in the 62nd American Exhibition, Painting and Sculpture at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1957, and then he got some coverage in Time magazine the next year.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, for a young artist, that's huge.
It shows that he was already making a name for himself.
Yeah.
But it was his move to Houston in the mid-1960s that really seemed to take his career to the next level.
Okay.
He taught at Rice University, had a solo exhibition at Plumtree Gallery,
Yeah.
and his work started appearing in more and more prestigious exhibitions.
So then in 1967, he had the Metamorphosis exhibition at the University of Oklahoma.
Right.
Was that a big turning point for him?
It seems so, based on the info we have, Metamorphosis marked a shift towards a more abstract and symbolic style. It hinted at the direction his work would take later on.
So that's where the seeds of Eternal Dance were planted.
Yeah, possibly.
And then as we get into the 1970s, we see his career really take off.
Yeah.
He had solo exhibitions at a bunch of galleries, including the Moody Gallery, which represented him for years.
Yeah, one of the best.
And he was in group exhibitions, too, with some of the biggest artists at the time.
He was really in the mix.
And it wasn't just local recognition either. He was exhibiting nationally and even internationally.
Right, breaking into the New York art scene in 1973 with Extraordinary Realities at the Whitney Museum.
Wow, that's huge.
Is a major platform. And his inclusion there really shows that Camblin's work was resonating with curators and critics all over the country.
Yeah.
He was being recognized for his unique vision and his ability to challenge what people thought art should be.
But he never let the success go to his head, did he? I'm thinking about that 1972 exhibition at David Gallery,
Oh, yeah?
where he bartered his artwork for goods and services instead of selling it for money.
That was such a cool idea.
It seems like a pretty deliberate move to challenge the way art was being commercialized.
Totally. It was
And
like he was saying art should be for everyone, not just rich people.
exactly. It was about democratizing art, making it more about human connection
Uh-huh.
than money.
And it shows a playful side to him, too. You know?
Yeah.
Like, he's poking fun at the art market, but at the same time creating this unique way for people to connect with his work.
I totally agree. It shows his independent spirit and that he wasn't afraid to break the rules.
Right. And it wasn't a one-time thing either. He kept experimenting with these unconventional approaches throughout his career.
Yeah, like in 1977, he collaborated with the anonymous box company for the Incomplete Works exhibition at Moody Gallery.
Oh, right. Boxes, objects, mixed media.
Hmm.
It sounds like he was really pushing the limits of what we consider art.
Yeah, and encouraging people to participate in the process.
Exactly. And if we think about his quote about art becoming participatory, it's clear that he wasn't just interested in creating objects for people to look at.
Right.
He wanted his art to be an interactive experience,
Mm.
something that engaged the viewer on multiple levels.
It's like he was blurring the lines between the artist and the audience,
Yeah.
inviting us to step into his world and be a part of it.
And that was a pretty radical concept, especially back then. But Camblin was never afraid to push boundaries. He was always evolving, experimenting, trying new ways to express his vision.
Speaking of engaging with the world in 1979, he was part of Doors, Houston artists at the Alley Theater.
Oh, yeah, as part of the Houston Festival.
That's right, installations performances. It sounds like they turned the whole theater into an art
It
experience.
was a big event.
It seems like he was always looking for new ways to reach people, to break down those barriers between art and everyday life.
He really was. It shows his restless creative spirit. He wasn't content to just stay in the gallery or the museum.
Right.
He wanted to bring art to the people, to meet them where they were at,
Yeah.
and challenge their ideas about what art could be.
So, by the end of the 1970s, Camblin was a force to be reckoned with. He had achieved national and international recognition.
He had made it.
He had a loyal following, and he was still pushing boundaries with his experimental approach. What happened next? How did his work and career evolve in the 1980s?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll see how Camblin navigated the 1980s and beyond, and how his artistic vision continued to grow.
We left off with Camblin riding this wave of success in the late 70s, pushing boundaries, challenging conventions, and really making a name for himself. But as we move into the 80s, there seems to be a shift in his focus. Like the biography mentions, this more introspective quality to his work during this period.
You're right. There's a subtle but important nuance there. While the 70s were marked by that bold experimentation and the drive to engage with the public, but the 80s seem to be more about inward reflection for Camblin. It's not that he stopped exhibiting or creating.
Right.
It's more that his work takes on a quieter, more contemplative tone.
I see that reflected in the 1980 exhibition at the Memorial Art Gallery of the University of Rochester.
Oh, yeah.
The title, Contemporary Drawings and Watercolors. It suggests a departure from the large-scale, vibrant works that, he was known for.
Right. Think about the delicate lines and subtle color washes of watercolors.
Yeah.
They lend themselves to a more intimate, introspective kind of art making. It's as if Camblin was turning his gaze inward, exploring, the depths of his own experience with this newfound sensitivity.
And yet he never completely abandoned that playful, experimental side of himself.
Well, of course not.
The bio mentions Little Egypt Water Workshop in 1981,
Right.
where he and these other artists created art in and around Galveston Bay. It seems like a continuation of his desire to blur those lines between art and life.
Absolutely. Camblin was always drawn to nature, and Little Egypt Water Workshop gave him a unique opportunity to engage with the elements, to explore the fluidity and impermanence of creation, much like the ever-changing waters of the bay.
So it's like he was seeking a deeper connection with the rhythms of nature.
Yeah, letting them inform his artistic process.
Which brings us to 1984 and Camblin's big retrospective exhibition at the Midtown Art Center in Houston. A retrospective is a pretty significant milestone for any artist. It's a chance to look back at their body of work,
Yeah.
to trace their evolution and see those themes and threads that connect everything.
And I think the title of the exhibition, Bob Camblin, A Houston retrospective, 1968-1984, really speaks volumes.
Yeah.
It emphasizes his connection to Houston,
Hmm.
the city that really nurtured his artistic growth,
Mm.
and it frames his journey within a specific time frame,
Yeah.
allowing viewers to witness those transformations in his style and approach over those 16 years.
Did the retrospective have a particular impact on his career? Did it mark a turning point or solidify his status?
Well, it's tough to say if any one event was a defining moment, but I think the retrospective served as a culmination of his achievements up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
It really cemented his reputation as this major figure in the Houston art scene and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
and it gave a wider audience a chance to really appreciate the breadth and depth of his work.
But as we move into the latter half of the 80s, it seems like Camblin's output slows down a little bit. He was still exhibiting, but not with the same intensity. Do you think this was a conscious decision to step back from the spotlight?
It's possible, remember that quote we discussed earlier about futility and provocation at war with one another.
Yeah.
Maybe Camblin had reached a point where he felt less compelled to, prove himself,
Mm.
to constantly push boundaries or seek external validation. Maybe he was more interested in exploring his own creative impulses without the pressure of expectations or deadlines.
That makes me think of his concept of carefree idleness, that idea of letting go of striving and allowing inspiration to come naturally.
Yeah,
Maybe he was entering a phase where the joy of creation was more important than accolades or recognition.
that's a great point. And it fits with what we know about his interest in Zen philosophy.
Yeah.
Zen emphasizes being present, letting go of attachments to outcomes, and finding peace in everyday experience.
Right.
Perhaps his later work reflects that shift in perspective,
Yeah.
a move towards a more serene and contemplative way of making art.
So even though the biography gives us a detailed account of Camblin's exhibitions and awards and all his accomplishments, it's important to look beyond the surface and consider the deeper motivations and philosophies that shaped his artistic journey.
Exactly, and that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're not just listing facts and dates.
Right.
We're trying to develop a deeper understanding of Camblin as both an artist and a person.
Yeah.
We're seeing how his ideas, his experiences, his philosophies all came together to create this really unique and enduring body of work.
What do you think is the most important takeaway from our exploration of Bob Camblin?
I think Camblin's legacy lies in his commitment to seeing the world differently. He reminds us that art isn't just about making beautiful things.
Yep.
It's about expanding our perception, challenging conventions, and finding meaning in the unexpected. He encourages us to embrace paradox, to cultivate magic seeing, and to never stop exploring the possibilities of creativity.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And for those of you listening, if you could ask Bob Camblin one question, what would it be? What would you want to know about his art, his life, or his philosophy? Keep that question in mind as you continue to explore his work.
And remember, you can cultivate magic seeing too. Pay attention to the world around you, look for the beauty in the everyday, and don't be afraid to let your imagination run wild. Who knows, you might stumble upon your own mystic switch and unlock a whole world of creative possibilities.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bob Camblin.